Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October 31st, 2016 was supposed to be just another easy night of making extra cash. I was 19, a sophomore at the local community college, and babysitting for the Bradshaw family had become my regular weekend gig. They lived in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where the biggest drama was usually someone forgetting to bring their trash cans in. Mr. and Mrs. Bradshaw were heading to some fancy corporate Halloween party downtown, and they needed someone to watch their two kids, Jamie, who was 8, and little Sophia, barely 5. The pay was good, $50 plus whatever leftovers they had in the fridge, and the kids were usually asleep by 9 anyway. I remember thinking it would be the easiest money I'd ever make, just sitting there watching Netflix while handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. The Bradshaws left around 7:30, Mrs. Bradshaw doing that typical parent thing, where she wrote down 5 different phone numbers, even though I already had her cell saved in my contacts. The kids were hyped up on pre-Halloween candy their grandma had sent them, running around in their costumes. Jamie was some superhero I didn't recognize, and Sophia was a princess with a tiara that kept sliding off her head. I managed to corral them onto the couch with the promise of watching Hocus Pocus, and for about an hour, everything was completely normal. Trick-or-treaters came in waves, groups of kids with pillowcases and plastic pumpkins, parents hovering at the end of the driveway with flashlights. I was actually enjoying myself, remembering how much fun Halloween used to be when I was their age, before everything got complicated with college applications and part-time jobs and all that adult stuff that suddenly seemed to matter so much. Around 9 o'clock, after I'd gotten both kids into their pajamas and tucked into Jamie's room, Sophia insisted on sleeping in her brother's bed during scary nights. I noticed this person in a clown costume standing at the corner of the property, right where the Bradshaw's lawn met the sidewalk. At first, I didn't think much of it. Halloween brings out all kinds of weird costumes, and teenagers especially love going overboard with the creepy stuff. But this clown wasn't moving with a group, wasn't carrying a candy bag, wasn't doing anything really except standing there. The costume itself was disturbing in its simplicity. A dirty white jumpsuit with pom-poms down the front, and this mask that even from the living room window I could tell was different from the cheap ones they sell at party stores. The features were too elongated, the smile too wide, painted in this faded red that looked brown under the streetlight. I texted my boyfriend Nathan around 9:15. "There's this creepy clown outside the house I'm babysitting at. He's just standing there." Nathan, being Nathan, immediately called me instead of texting back, and I remember whispering into the phone even though the kids were upstairs and couldn't hear me. He told me to call the cops if the guy didn't leave soon, but I felt stupid making that call. What was I going to say that someone in a Halloween costume was standing on a public sidewalk? While I was talking to Nathan, I walked from room to room, checking all the windows, and that's when I realized the clown wasn't just standing in one spot anymore. He was walking a slow circle around the house, maintaining the same distance from the walls, like he was tracing some invisible boundary. Each window I looked through, I'd catch a glimpse of him passing by, that mask turning slightly toward the house each time, never fully facing forward, always keeping the house in his peripheral vision. Nathan stayed on the phone with me for another 20 minutes, and during that time, the clown completed maybe 3 full circles around the house. I started timing them. Each lap took about 6 minutes, always the same pace, never speeding up or slowing down. The trick-or-treaters had thinned out by then, just the occasional group of older kids without costumes looking for last-minute candy, and none of them seemed to notice or care about the clown. I kept thinking maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe one of the Bradshaw's neighbors hired someone to add atmosphere to the neighborhood or something. But there was something mechanical about his movement, something practiced and deliberate that made my chest feel tight. I told Nathan I was going to try something, and I turned off the porch light, the universal signal that we were out of candy. The clown stopped mid-stride when the light went out, stood perfectly still for maybe 10 seconds, then continued his circle like nothing had happened. By 9:45, I was genuinely scared. I double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains except for a small gap I was using to watch him, and I'd moved into the kitchen where I could see both the front and back doors. Nathan was trying to keep me calm, suggesting maybe the guy was high or drunk, just some weirdo who would eventually get bored and leave. But then I noticed something that made me actually gasp out loud. The clown had something in his hand that I hadn't seen before, or maybe he'd just pulled it out. It was a phone, and he was holding it up, not like he was texting or calling someone, but like he was recording. He was filming the house as he walked, the phone's screen casting this sick blue glow on the lower part of his mask. I immediately thought about the kids upstairs, about how their room faced the street, and I ran up to make sure their curtains were closed. They were both sleeping soundly, Jamie sprawled out with one arm hanging off the bed, Sophia curled up against him sucking her thumb. I stood there for a moment, listening to their breathing, wondering if I should wake them up and bring them downstairs with me. I decided against waking the kids. They were safer not knowing what was happening, I figured. When I got back to the kitchen, Nathan was practically yelling through the phone, asking if I was okay because I'd gone quiet for too long. I told him about the filming, and that's when he said he was coming over. He lived about 15 minutes away, and I remember feeling both relieved and more anxious somehow, like his coming over made this whole thing more real, more serious. I gave him the address again, even though he'd dropped me off there before, and then I went back to my spot by the kitchen window. The clown had changed his pattern. Instead of walking continuous circles, he would now stop at each corner of the house and stand there for exactly 30 seconds. I counted, before moving to the next corner. At each stop, he would slowly turn his head from left to right. That phone held steady, recording everything. 10:13 is when everything went wrong. I remember the exact time because I was texting Nathan asking how far away he was, and he said he was parking down the street because he didn't want to pull into the driveway and potentially escalate things with the clown. I was typing back, "Please hurry," when I heard the basement door open. Not the outside basement door, the one inside the house, the one that connected the basement to the hallway near the bathroom. My whole body went rigid. The Bradshaws had mentioned that door sometimes didn't latch properly, that you really had to push it closed, but I knew I hadn't been in the basement at all that night. I stood there in the kitchen, phone in one hand, a knife from the drawer in the other. When had I grabbed that? Listening to footsteps that were definitely coming from inside the house. Slow, deliberate steps, not trying to be quiet exactly, but not making extra noise either. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the main stairs, the ones that led up to where the kids were sleeping, and I knew I had to move. I dropped my phone on the kitchen counter. It made this awful clattering sound that seemed impossibly loud, and ran for the stairs. My socks slipped on the hardwood floor as I rounded the corner, and I could hear those footsteps behind me now, faster, taking the stairs two at a time. I burst into Jamie's room and slammed the door behind me, turning the lock with shaking fingers. The kids woke up confused, Sophia starting to cry, and I pulled them both into Jamie's closet, whispering that we were playing a game, a Halloween game where we had to hide really quietly. Jamie was old enough to know something was wrong, his eyes wide in the darkness of the closet, but he held his sister tight and didn't say a word. Through the closet door, I could hear footsteps in the hallway, slow again, stopping at each door. The handle of Jamie's room jiggled once, twice, then nothing. Just breathing on the other side of the door, raspy and deliberately loud, like whoever it was wanted us to know they were there. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then I heard Nathan's voice from downstairs, shouting my name, saying the front door was wide open. The footsteps in the hallway moved fast then, running toward the stairs, and I heard Nathan yell something I couldn't make out, followed by what sounded like furniture falling over. I wanted to leave the closet, wanted to help, but Sophia was clinging to me so tight I could barely breathe, and Jamie was whispering, "Don't leave us, please don't leave us," over and over. We heard more crashing, the sound of glass breaking, Nathan's voice getting more distant like he was chasing someone outside. Then suddenly everything went quiet. Not normal quiet. That awful, heavy kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat and nothing else. I kept the kids in that closet for another 15 minutes, until we heard sirens and saw red and blue lights flashing through the bedroom window. Only then did I open the closet door, carrying Sophia while Jamie held onto the back of my shirt, and we made our way downstairs to where 2 police officers were standing in the destroyed living room. Nathan sitting on the couch with a bloody nose, and no sign of anyone in a clown costume anywhere. The police searched the entire neighborhood that night, but they never found whoever was in that clown costume. Nathan told them he'd chased the person through the backyard and into the wooded area behind the houses, but lost them in the darkness. The really disturbing part came when they checked the basement. The lock on the exterior basement door had been picked, and there were muddy footprints showing someone had been down there for a while, maybe even before I arrived that evening. They found my phone in the kitchen where I'd left it, still recording a video I didn't remember starting. When the detective played it back, you could hear me talking to Nathan, then the door opening, my footsteps running, and then about 4 minutes of just breathing. That same raspy breathing I'd heard outside Jamie's door. The Bradshaws came home to find their house swarming with police, and Mrs. Bradshaw just held her kids and cried, while Mr. Bradshaw kept apologizing to me, like any of this was somehow their fault. They moved out 3 months later, said they couldn't stand being in that house anymore. For years I had nightmares about that mask, about those mechanical circles around the house, about what would have happened if Nathan hadn't shown up when he did. I moved away for college, tried to put it all behind me, but Halloween always brought it back. Then, about 2 years ago, I got a call from Nathan. He still lived in our hometown, had actually bought a house about 6 blocks from where the Bradshaws used to live. He was doing some landscaping in his backyard, planning to put in a pool, when his shovel hit something hard about 3 feet down. It was wrapped in plastic, a garbage bag duct taped into a bundle. Inside was that clown mask, unmistakable with its elongated features and faded red smile, along with a white jumpsuit and something else that made Nathan call the police immediately, a notebook filled with addresses, dates, and detailed observations about families in the neighborhood. The Bradshaws' address was there, along with notes about their schedule, their kids' names, my name, what time I usually arrived and left. But here's what still keeps me up at night. Their entry was from 2016, but the newest entries were from just weeks before Nathan found it. Someone had been using that same mask, that same method, still watching families, still taking notes. The police took everything as evidence, but they never found who buried it there. Nathan sold that house within a month, didn't even wait to get his asking price. Neither of us talks about it anymore, but every Halloween, we text each other just to check in, just to make sure we're both okay, both safe, both nowhere near any windows where someone might be walking slow circles outside, recording everything, waiting for the right moment to test a basement door. Halloween 2022 changed everything for me. I was a senior at the State University, majoring in journalism, and I'd been covering campus stories for the student paper since freshman year. That October night started like any other Halloween weekend. Costume parties everywhere, drunk students stumbling around downtown, the usual chaos. I wasn't even supposed to be working that night, but our regular photographer, Kevin, had called in sick at the last minute. The editor asked if I could cover the big costume party at the Vault, this converted bank building that served as the hottest club near campus. I grabbed my camera, threw on a lazy vampire costume, just fangs and a cape over regular clothes, and headed downtown around 10 p.m. The streets were packed with zombies, witches, superheroes, everyone trying to outdo each other with their costumes. The party was exactly what you'd expect. Wall-to-wall people, terrible music, overpriced drinks. I spent about 2 hours taking photos of costume contest winners and drunk kids making fools of themselves. Around midnight, I noticed this guy in an incredibly detailed plague doctor mask. You know, those bird-like masks with the long beaks that medieval doctors wore during the Black Death. But this wasn't some cheap Halloween store version. The leather looked aged and authentic, with brass fixtures and glass eyepieces that reflected the strobe lights in this unsettling way. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a long black coat that seemed way too heavy for the warm October weather we were having. What really caught my attention was how he moved through the crowd. People seemed to unconsciously step aside when he walked by, creating this bubble of space around him that felt wrong in such a packed venue. I raised my camera to get a shot of the costume, but when I looked through the viewfinder, he was staring directly at me through those glass lenses. I lowered the camera and he was gone, just vanished into the crowd like smoke. That should have been my first warning, but I brushed it off. People move fast in clubs, especially when they're drunk. I kept shooting photos for another hour until I ran into my roommate Jordan, who was dressed as some anime character I didn't recognize. He was completely wasted, barely able to stand, and his girlfriend Melissa was trying to convince him to leave. She asked if I could help her get him back to our apartment since it was on my way home anyway. We basically carried Jordan out of the club around 1:30 a.m., each of us supporting one of his arms while he mumbled about wanting pizza. The downtown area was still buzzing with people, but as we turned onto Riverside Avenue, the crowds thinned out. That's when I saw the plague doctor again, standing under a streetlight about a block ahead of us, perfectly still, facing our direction. Melissa noticed him too and made some joke about creepy dudes on Halloween, but something about the way he stood there made my chest tighten. We turned down Crawford Street to avoid walking past him. It was a shortcut anyway, cutting through this older part of downtown where they hadn't updated the streetlights yet. The street was darker than usual because several lights were out, and the shadows from the working ones created these long, distorted shapes on the pavement. Jordan had gone quiet, his head lolling forward as we dragged him along. About halfway down the block, Melissa's phone rang, her sister calling to make sure she got home safe. She let go of Jordan to answer, and I had to grab him with both arms to keep him from falling. That's when I heard footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate, the sound of heavy boots on concrete. I turned around and saw that plague doctor mask again, maybe 30 feet back, just walking steadily in our direction. I told Melissa we needed to move faster, but she was still on the phone, not paying attention. Jordan chose that exact moment to throw up all over his anime costume and my shoes, the smell of cheap beer and whatever he'd eaten hitting me instantly. While I was trying to keep him upright and not gag myself, Melissa finally hung up and started freaking out about Jordan's condition. We needed to stop and let him catch his breath, so we propped him against a brick wall next to this abandoned print shop that had been closed for years. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had graffiti tags I recognized from around campus. I kept glancing back, but the plague doctor had stopped too, maintaining that same 30-foot distance, just standing there in the middle of the sidewalk. The weird part was how patient he seemed, not approaching, not leaving, just waiting. Under the broken streetlight, I could barely make out his silhouette, but those glass eyepieces somehow caught what little light there was, creating 2 pinpoints of reflection that never moved away from us. Melissa was digging through her purse for tissues to clean Jordan up when we heard voices coming from the other end of Crawford Street. A group of people laughing and singing, probably heading home from another party. Relief washed through me because witnesses meant safety, right? But as the group got closer, I realized they were all wearing masks too. A wolf, a Jason hockey mask, something that looked like melted flesh, and another plague doctor mask, though cheaper looking than the one following us. They walked past us without acknowledging we were there, even though Jordan was actively dry heaving against the wall, and Melissa was practically yelling at him to drink some water. The group just flowed around us like we were invisible, their laughter continuing uninterrupted. When I looked back again, our plague doctor had moved closer, maybe 15 feet now, and 2 more figures had joined him, both in different but equally elaborate masks. One looked like a Victorian porcelain doll face. The other was some kind of demon with curved horns. That's when panic really set in. I grabbed Jordan under his arms and basically started dragging him forward while Melissa kept asking what was wrong. I couldn't form words to explain that 3 people in masks were following us and getting closer with each passing second. We stumbled forward, Jordan's feet barely helping, his weight making every step a struggle. The end of Crawford Street opened onto Washington Boulevard, where there should have been traffic, more people, safety. But when we reached the intersection, the usually busy boulevard was completely empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no sound except our own ragged breathing and Jordan's incoherent mumbling. The traffic lights were still changing from green to yellow to red, illuminating the empty asphalt in shifting colors, but there was nothing to direct. I could hear those footsteps getting closer, multiple sets now, no longer trying to match our pace but gaining on us. Melissa finally turned around and saw them. Her scream cut through the silence like breaking glass. We ran, or tried to run with Jordan barely conscious between us. We made it maybe half a block down Washington before Jordan's legs completely gave out and we had to stop. The masked figures had spread out behind us, no longer walking in a group but forming a semicircle that was slowly closing in. That's when I noticed others stepping out from doorways and alleys ahead of us. More masks, different styles but all elaborate and disturbing. A cracked baby doll face with one eye missing, a leather mask with zippers for features, something that looked like exposed muscle and sinew. They moved with this horrible synchronization, like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario. Melissa was crying, begging them to leave us alone, offering money, her phone, anything. But they never spoke, never made any sound except their footsteps. The original plague doctor raised one gloved hand and pointed at Jordan, then made a beckoning motion with his fingers. The message was clear. They wanted him. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled out my phone and started recording video, thinking maybe evidence would help later. Maybe someone would believe us. Through the screen, I saw something that made my knees weak. Jordan wasn't Jordan anymore. Where my roommate's face should have been, there was a blank, smooth surface, like skin stretched over where features should be. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just flesh-colored nothing. Melissa saw my phone screen and looked down at what we were holding between us. Her scream this time was different, raw terror mixed with confusion. But when I looked directly at Jordan without the phone, his face was normal again, drunk and pale, but definitely there. I lifted the phone back up and through the camera, that horrible blank face returned. The masked figures had stopped moving, apparently waiting for us to understand something. I switched to the front-facing camera and nearly dropped the phone. Melissa and I looked normal, but behind us, the street wasn't Crawford anymore. Through the phone screen, we were standing in some kind of warehouse or factory, with rusted metal walls and industrial equipment I couldn't identify. The plague doctor tilted his head, almost like he was amused, then reached up and removed his mask. Underneath was just a normal guy, maybe late 20s, with stubble and tired eyes. One by one, the others removed their masks too. Regular people, different ages, different ethnicities, but all with this exhausted, resigned expression. The man who'd worn the plague doctor mask spoke for the first time, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in a while. "He's already gone. Has been since you left the club. What you're carrying is just an echo and it's drawing them here. Every Halloween, they send out echoes wearing faces, looking for specific people. You can keep dragging that thing around, but it's not your friend anymore." He pulled out an old flip phone, checked the time, and continued. "In about 3 minutes, that echo is going to walk back to where it came from, and if you're still holding on to it when it does, you'll go too. We've been trying to warn people for years, but the masks are the only way we can see each other, the only way we can move through the spaces where the echoes hunt." Melissa was sobbing, saying this was insane, that Jordan was right there. We could see him. But I believed the man because something deep in my gut had been screaming wrongness since we'd left the club. The plague doctor man tossed me a rubber Halloween mask, a cheap werewolf one from a dollar store. "Put it on and look at your friend again," he said. "Then decide if you want to let go." With shaking fingers, I pulled the mask over my head. Through the eye holes, Jordan wasn't there at all. Just a column of static, like television snow in human shape, and where his feet should have touched the ground, there was nothing, just empty space. Worse, I could see thin, translucent threads extending from the static thing into both Melissa and me, wrapped around our wrists like fishing line. The masked people weren't people anymore either. Through the werewolf mask, they looked like burn victims, with melted, scarred skin and missing pieces, but their eyes were kind, desperate even. 60 seconds, the man said, his voice distorted now through my mask-filtered perception. Drop it and run. Don't look back, don't go home tonight, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone calls your name. Melissa and I let go of Jordan at the same time. The moment we did, the static thing stood perfectly upright on its own, turned and began walking back toward Crawford Street with mechanical precision. We ran in the opposite direction, our feet slapping against wet pavement I didn't remember being wet before. Behind us, I heard the masked people scattering, their footsteps fading in different directions. We ran for blocks until we reached the 24-hour diner on Peachtree. Bright lights and normal people everywhere. Melissa collapsed in a booth, hyperventilating, while I called 911 to report Jordan missing. The police found him 3 hours later, wandering downtown in his ruined costume with no memory of anything after midnight. He was fine, completely fine, except for one thing. He swore he'd been at his parents' house in Ohio the whole time, that he'd never even come back to campus after fall break. Security footage from the vault showed him at the party, but every camera that should have caught him on Crawford Street just showed static from 1:47 to 1:50 a.m. The really screwed up part? When I developed the photos from my camera the next day, every shot I'd taken of the plague doctor at the club showed a different person's face in that mask. And in the background of each one, there was always someone in a regular Halloween mask watching. I'd been counting down the days until I could leave my hometown since junior year of high school, and finally making it to State University felt like stepping into a whole different world. I'd been there for about 2 months when Halloween rolled around, and I was still that awkward freshman who ate most of her meals alone in the dining hall. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, leaving me with nothing but a pile of homework and a bag of fun-sized Snickers I'd bought for myself. I was sitting in the library that afternoon, October 31st, trying to focus on my psychology textbook when these 3 girls from my English Lit class approached my table. We'd done a group project together a few weeks earlier, but I wouldn't say we were friends, just the kind of acquaintances who smile and wave when you pass each other on campus. The one who did most of the talking was Ashley, this bubbly blonde who always wore designer everything, and somehow managed to look put together even at 8 in the morning. She leaned against my table and asked if I had plans for tonight, and when I said no, her face lit up like she'd just won something. They were going to this exclusive Halloween party at a house off campus, she explained, and the host specifically asked them to bring more people because a bunch of guests had canceled last minute. The other 2 girls, whose names I'm pretty sure were Chloe and Madison, but I honestly couldn't remember for certain, stood behind her nodding and smiling. Ashley showed me the address on her phone, 47882 Garrison Road, about 15 minutes from campus, and said to be there at 9, costume optional since it was such short notice. I remember feeling this little spark of excitement, thinking maybe this was finally my chance to break into the social scene I'd been watching from the sidelines. Around 4 that afternoon, I was walking from the library to my dorm when I noticed this guy behind me. He had on a gray hoodie with the hood up, dark jeans, and these beat-up red Converse that made this weird squeaking sound every few steps. At first, I didn't think much of it. Campus was always crowded. But then I took a detour through the student union to grab a coffee, and when I came out 20 minutes later, there he was again, maybe 30 feet behind me. Same squeaky shoes, same hunched way of walking, like he was trying to make himself smaller. I ducked into the campus bookstore and pretended to browse the school spirit section for a good 10 minutes, watching the entrance through the corner of my eye. He never came in, and when I finally left, I didn't see him anywhere. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that it was just some student who happened to be going the same direction. I spent way too long getting ready that night, changing outfits 3 times before settling on black jeans and this vintage band tee I'd found at a thrift store, figuring it was casual enough not to look like I was trying too hard but still appropriate for a party. The Uber driver had trouble finding the address at first, driving up and down Garrison Road twice before finally spotting the house numbers hidden behind an overgrown hedge. The house itself was one of those modern rental places that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All glass and sharp angles, with those automatic lights that turn on when you walk up the driveway. Music was thumping from inside, but something seemed weird about the windows. They all had these heavy blackout curtains drawn tight, not a single gap to see inside. Ashley's white BMW was parked out front though, or at least I thought it was hers. Same model, same sorority sticker on the back windshield. So I paid the driver and headed up to the front door. The door opened before I could even knock, and there was Madison wearing cat ears and holding a red Solo cup, giving me this huge smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The music was louder inside, but not party loud. More like someone had just turned on a playlist to fill the silence, and the living room only had maybe 12 people scattered around, not the packed party I'd been expecting. Ashley waved from across the room where she was talking to some guy I didn't recognize, and Chloe was nowhere to be seen. The house had that sterile feel of a rental. Generic artwork on the walls, no family photos, that kind of aggressively neutral furniture that's meant to offend nobody and ends up feeling like nobody lives there at all. Madison handed me a drink without asking what I wanted, something pink and way too sweet that burned going down, and started introducing me to people whose names immediately slipped out of my head because I was too busy trying to figure out why everyone seemed to be watching me without actually looking directly at me. That's when I saw him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter and peeling the label off a beer bottle with his thumbnail. The guy from earlier, still in the same gray hoodie, those red Converse visible even from across the room. My whole body went rigid, and I must have made some kind of noise because Madison grabbed my arm and asked if I was okay, her fingers pressing harder than necessary into my skin. I tried to casually ask who he was, and she got this confused look and said his name was Brandon, Ashley's cousin from out of town who'd crashed the party last minute. But here's the thing. When I'd done that group project with Ashley, she'd spent half the time complaining about being an only child with no cousins, no extended family at all, just her and her divorced parents. I excused myself to find the bathroom, needing a minute to think, and Madison pointed down a hallway saying it was the last door on the right, still gripping my arm like she didn't want to let go. The hallway was darker than it should have been, with only one dim bulb at the far end, and I passed 3 closed doors before reaching the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door and immediately tried calling my roommate, but my phone had no signal, not even 1 bar, which made no sense because we were still in the city. I tried connecting to Wi-Fi, but the only network that showed up was password protected with a name that was just random numbers and letters. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and when I splashed cold water on my face, I noticed my reflection looked wrong in the mirror. It was one of those 2-way mirrors, the kind where the reflection seems slightly darker, slightly off. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes, and I swear I could see the faint outline of a room on the other side. That's when I heard footsteps stop right outside the bathroom door, and someone tried the handle, jiggling it when they found it locked. "Everything okay in there?" It was a man's voice I didn't recognize. Definitely not Brandon's because I'd heard him talking to someone when I'd walked past the kitchen. The handle jiggled again, more insistent this time, and then I heard keys jingling. Keys. Why would someone have keys to the bathroom at a party? I looked around frantically for another exit, but there was just a tiny window above the shower, barely big enough for a cat to squeeze through. "Just a minute," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady while I opened the bathroom cabinet, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing but toilet paper and cleaning supplies. The key sound stopped, followed by whispering I couldn't make out. and then footsteps walking away. I waited another full minute before cracking the door open, and the hallway was empty. But now all three of those previously closed doors were standing wide open, revealing dark rooms that seemed to be watching me. I knew I had to get out of that house immediately. But when I walked back toward the living room, the layout seemed different somehow. The hallway felt longer, and there was a turn I didn't remember taking before. The music had stopped completely, replaced by this low murmur of voices that sounded rehearsed, like people reading from a script. When I finally reached the living room, everyone had rearranged themselves. They were all sitting now, facing the front door in these neat little rows like they were waiting for something. Ashley stood up when she saw me, that same bright smile plastered on her face, and announced to the room that I was ready. Ready for what? I tried to head for the door, but two guys I hadn't noticed before stepped in front of it. Both of them bigger than football players, just standing there with their arms crossed. Brandon had moved from the kitchen and was now sitting on the arm of a couch, those red sneakers tapping against the floor in this rhythm that made my teeth hurt. "Your Uber already left," Ashley said, walking toward me with her phone in her hand, showing me the app like that proved something. "But don't worry, we've arranged another ride for you." That's when I noticed everyone else had their phones out too. All of them pointed at me, recording. The little red lights on their screens looked like eyes in the dim room, and I realized with absolute clarity that whatever they had planned, they wanted it documented. I backed up until I hit the wall, my mind racing through options. The back door, but I could see through to the kitchen where three more people were standing guard. The windows, but those blackout curtains were probably there for a reason. And even if I could get through one, I had no idea what was on the other side. Madison and Chloe flanked Ashley now, all three of them moving closer in this synchronized way that made them look like hunters who'd done this before. "We've been watching you for weeks," Ashley said, her voice different now, emptied of that fake sweetness. "You walk the same routes, eat at the same places, sit in the same spot in the library. You made it so easy." That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the lamp from the side table next to me, this heavy ceramic thing shaped like a pineapple, and hurled it straight through the front window. The glass exploded outward with this incredible crash that seemed to snap everyone out of their choreographed movements for just a second. And in that second, I ran. Not toward the window I'd just broken, they'd expect that, but straight at the two guys blocking the door, screaming at the top of my lungs this primal sound I didn't know I could make. They hesitated, probably not expecting the quiet library girl to charge them like a linebacker, and I dropped down at the last second, sliding between them on the polished floor. My knee hit the door hard, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and I was up and fumbling with the deadbolt before they could grab me. The door flew open and I burst out into the night, still screaming, and that's what saved me: the neighbors. Turns out the house next door was having their own Halloween party. A real one, with 40 or 50 people who came pouring out when they heard the window break and me screaming like I was being murdered. Brandon tried to follow me out, but stopped dead when he saw all those people streaming across the lawn, some of them already on their phones calling 911. I collapsed on the neighbor's driveway, sobbing and trying to explain what had happened, but I didn't need to convince them. They could see Ashley and her group standing in the doorway of the house, all of them still holding their phones, looking like kids caught doing something terrible. The police showed up within minutes, and that's when everything unraveled fast. Turns out the house was an Airbnb rented with a stolen credit card. Ashley and the other two girls weren't even students at State University, and Brandon, his real name was Colin, had a record for assault and was violating parole just by being in the state. They found cameras hidden throughout the house, streaming to some website I don't even want to know about. The whole thing was apparently part of some sick streaming game, where people pay to watch staged scenarios with unsuspecting victims. The police said I was lucky. 2 other girls from different colleges had reported similar setups that month, but they hadn't been able to prove anything because the perpetrators always cleaned up and disappeared. This time, they'd gotten sloppy, too confident. They're all in prison now, and I had to testify at the trial, which was its own kind of nightmare. but at least it's over. I finished my freshman year, though I changed dorms and vary my routes everywhere I go now. I still can't hear squeaky shoes without feeling sick, and I definitely don't accept party invitations from anyone I don't know well. But I survived, and that's what matters. Sometimes that's all you can do. Survive and make sure the bastards don't get to do it to anyone else. Halloween night 2018 will permanently live in my brain as the night I realized how vulnerable we really are in our own homes. I was 27 at the time, living with my girlfriend Vanessa in a small 2-bedroom rental house in Springfield, Massachusetts. We'd been together for about 3 years, and life was pretty normal. I worked as an insurance adjuster, she was a dental hygienist, and we had this comfortable routine where we'd cook dinner together most nights and watch terrible reality TV shows until we passed out on the couch. The house itself wasn't anything special, just one of those cookie-cutter builds from the 70s with thin walls and creaky floors. But it was ours for the time being. That Halloween fell on a Wednesday, and Vanessa had been excited about this new Italian place that opened downtown, so we'd made reservations weeks in advance. I remember she wore this deep purple dress that she'd been saving for a special occasion, and I'd actually ironed a button-down shirt for once, which she'd joked about all evening. We left around 6:30, right when the trick-or-treaters were starting to come around, and I'd left our porch light off since we wouldn't be home to hand out candy anyway. Dinner was fantastic. We're talking homemade pasta, wine that was probably too expensive for our budget, and this tiramisu that Vanessa kept saying she wanted to recreate at home. The restaurant had this cozy, dimly lit atmosphere, with fake cobwebs hung up for the holiday, and our waiter was wearing vampire fangs that kept slipping when he talked, which made us laugh every time he came to our table. We stayed longer than we'd planned, probably until around 9:30 or so, just enjoying each other's company without our phones or the TV as a distraction. The drive home took about 15 minutes, and I remember the streets were pretty much empty by then. Most of the kids had gone home, and the neighborhood had that eerie post-Halloween quiet where you could see decorations swaying in people's yards but no actual people anywhere. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed our next-door neighbor's house was completely dark, which was unusual because old Mr. Brennan usually stayed up late watching his police procedurals with the volume way too loud. Vanessa was humming some song from the restaurant's playlist as we walked up to our front door, and I was fishing for my keys in my jacket pocket, thinking about how I was definitely going to need to take some antacids before bed because of all that rich food. The first thing that hit me when I opened the door was this weird smell. Not terrible, but distinct, like someone had been eating cheap chocolate and those sour gummy candies that kids go crazy for. I stepped inside and flicked on the living room light, and that's when my brain started trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were candy wrappers everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Snickers wrappers on the coffee table, empty Kit Kat packages on the couch, those little fun-size Milky Way wrappers scattered across our area rug like confetti. My first thought was that maybe we'd left a window open and some bold raccoon had gotten in because we'd had issues with them getting into our trash before. But then I noticed our back door, the one that leads to our tiny excuse for a backyard, was open about 6 inches. Not wide open, not broken or forced, just open, like someone had stepped out for a second and forgotten to close it all the way. Vanessa came in behind me and immediately grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my jacket sleeve. "What the hell?" she whispered, and I could hear her voice shaking a little. I told her to stay by the front door while I checked it out, trying to sound way more confident than I actually felt. I walked through the living room carefully, stepping over the wrappers and trying to listen for any sounds. Our house was old enough that you couldn't walk anywhere without the floors announcing your presence, so I was making these soft creaking noises with every step, which made it even harder to hear anything else. The back door was definitely unlocked. I could see the deadbolt was turned to the open position, which meant someone had unlocked it from the inside, not forced it. That detail stuck with me because I'm obsessive about locking doors. Always have been. and I know for a fact I'd checked that door before we left. I pushed it open wider with my foot and looked out into the backyard, but it was just darkness and the vague shapes of our pathetic attempt at a garden that had mostly died by September. The motion sensor light we'd installed last spring should have been on, but it wasn't, and I realized someone must have unscrewed the bulb because I could see it was missing from the socket. That's when the situation started feeling a lot less like dumb kids pulled a prank and a lot more like someone planned this. I came back inside and locked the door, sliding the deadbolt as quietly as I could. And that's when I saw the light coming from under the guest room door down the hallway. We never used that room. It was basically storage. Boxes of Vanessa's college textbooks, my old golf clubs that I kept pretending I'd use again, winter clothes in plastic bins, that kind of stuff. The light in there was one of those weak overhead fixtures with a pull chain, and we never turned it on because there was no reason to. I felt this wave of adrenaline hit me, the kind that makes your hearing go sharp and your muscles tense up like you're about to sprint or fight. I motioned for Vanessa to stay back, and I grabbed this heavy Maglite flashlight we kept by the back door. Not because I needed light, but because it was the closest thing to a weapon I had within reach. As I got closer to that door, maybe 10 feet away, I heard it. Breathing. Not heavy, not labored, just the quiet, rhythmic sound of someone trying very hard to stay still and silent. It was coming from inside that room, and whoever it was wasn't doing a great job of staying quiet, because I could hear this faint whistling sound on the exhale, like their nose was stuffy or they'd been running. My brain was racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a kid who'd gotten scared and was hiding. Maybe it was some homeless person who'd found a way in and was just trying to survive the cold night. Maybe it was someone high on drugs who didn't even know where they were. But then I heard a small mechanical sound, like a phone vibrating on silent mode, and the breathing stopped completely. Whoever was in there had just gotten a message or notification, and they were now aware that we were home, and probably knew we'd heard them. The silence that followed was worse than the breathing, because it meant they were listening for us, just as intently as we were listening for them. Vanessa had moved closer despite my warning, and she was standing maybe 5 feet behind me, her phone already open to the 911 screen, with her thumb hovering over the call button. I could see her face in the glow of her screen. She was pale, her jaw clenched, eyes wide but focused. I remember thinking how crazy it was that we were standing in our own hallway, in our own house, afraid of a door we opened and closed 100 times before. I raised my voice, trying to sound authoritative, but hearing it come out shakier than I wanted, and said something like, "We've already called the police, they're on their way, you need to come out now." Complete bluff, obviously, but I didn't know what else to do. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard movement. Not toward the door, but away from it, like shuffling footsteps moving toward the window on the far side of the room. That window. I knew that window didn't open easily because the frame had warped over time, and we'd never bothered to fix it since we didn't use that room anyway, which meant whoever was in there had probably come in through the back door, not the window, and was now trapped unless they wanted to confront us directly. I heard them struggling with the window, the scraping sound of wood against wood as they tried to force it up. Vanessa whispered urgently behind me, "Call them, actually call them right now," and I heard her fingers tapping on her screen. She spoke in this low, controlled voice to the dispatcher, giving our address and saying there was an intruder in our home, still inside. We could hear them. The dispatcher told her to get out of the house immediately, don't engage, wait outside for the officers, but Vanessa just said, "Okay," and didn't move an inch. We both stood there, frozen in this awful moment of decision. Do we run outside and risk them getting away, or do we stay and potentially trap them until the cops arrive? The window finally gave way with this loud crack, and I heard it slide up. I made a split-second choice and rushed to the door, throwing it open and hitting the light switch, flooding the room with that harsh overhead light. What I saw has been burned into my memory ever since. It was a man, probably mid-30s, wearing a stained gray hoodie and jeans that were too big for him, one leg already out the window. He turned and looked directly at me, and his face, God, his face was just so ordinary. Brown hair, patchy stubble, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't some masked monster or deranged lunatic. He just looked tired and desperate and caught. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. And in that moment, I saw something that genuinely unnerved me more than if he'd been aggressive. He looked disappointed, like a kid who'd been caught doing something they knew was wrong. There were more candy wrappers around his feet, and I noticed he'd been sitting in our desk chair, which he'd pulled over to face the door, like he'd been waiting there, eating Halloween candy and just listening to us on the other side. He had a backpack next to the chair, unzipped, and I could see what looked like Vanessa's jewelry box inside, along with my laptop that I'd left on the desk in our bedroom. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for another second, then pulled his other leg through the window and dropped down into our backyard. I heard the thud of him landing, then the sound of him scrambling over our chain-link fence into the alley behind our house. I ran to the window and looked out, but he was already gone, swallowed up by the darkness between houses. My whole body was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from this cocktail of adrenaline and anger and this bizarre relief that he was gone and hadn't hurt us. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, still on the phone with the dispatcher, and she looked into the room and saw the chair positioned like that, facing the door, and I watched her face change. She got it immediately, understood what I'd just understood. He'd been sitting there listening to us, maybe for minutes before we even knew he was there. Maybe he'd heard us come in, heard us talking in the living room, and just sat there in the dark deciding what to do. That thought made me feel violated in a way that the stolen stuff didn't. The police showed up maybe 6 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, but was apparently pretty fast for our area. 2 officers, one older guy who looked like he'd seen everything, and a younger woman who actually seemed really engaged with what we were telling them. They checked the whole house room by room, looked at the window he'd escaped through, examined the back door and the missing light bulb. The older cop, Officer Dennings, told us it was likely someone who'd been watching the house, knew we'd gone out for the evening, and had probably been inside for at least an hour or more based on the amount of candy wrappers. He pointed out that the guy had eaten maybe 20 or 30 pieces, which takes time, and he'd clearly gone through our bedroom since he had my laptop. The younger officer, her name tag said Alvarez, she's the one who asked the question that made everything click into place. How did he get in? Was the back door unlocked when you left? I told her no, absolutely not. I'm obsessive about locking up. She went back to examine the door more carefully with a flashlight, and when she came back, her expression was serious. There's no sign of forced entry, she said. No scratches on the lock, no damage to the frame. Whoever came in had a key. That statement hit me like a punch to the chest. A key. My mind immediately went to all the people who'd had access to our house. The landlord, obviously, and his maintenance guy who'd fixed our water heater last spring. We'd given a spare to Vanessa's sister for emergencies, but she lived 2 hours away, and we'd just seen her the previous weekend. I'd also lent our key to our friend Austin when we went on vacation in July, so he could water our plants and grab our mail, and he'd given it back, or at least I thought he had. Vanessa was going through the same mental checklist, and I could see panic building in her eyes. Officer Alvarez asked us to make a list of everyone who'd ever had a key, even temporarily, and to call our landlord to find out if anyone else had access to the spare keys he kept. The officers took photos of everything, bagged a few of the candy wrappers as evidence in case they caught the guy and needed to place him at the scene, and gave us a case number. Dennings told us bluntly that we needed to change our locks immediately, first thing tomorrow morning, and to seriously consider getting a security system. Before they left, Alvarez mentioned that there'd been a small uptick in break-ins in our neighborhood over the past month, all of them while residents were out, none of them violent, mostly just theft. But she said ours was the first one where the intruder was caught inside and the first where there was no forced entry. That made us special, lucky in the worst possible way. After they left, Vanessa and I didn't sleep that night. We pushed our dresser against the bedroom door, kept every light in the house on, and just sat up talking through every scenario we could think of. Around 3 in the morning, I remembered something that made my skin go cold. When we first moved in 2 years ago, our landlord had mentioned that the previous tenant had left suddenly, something about a bad breakup, and there'd been some confusion about whether all the keys had been returned. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now it felt significant. The next morning, exhausted and paranoid, I called a locksmith before I even had coffee. The guy came out that same day and changed every single lock on the house. Front door, back door, even the side gate. Cost us almost $400, but I didn't care. We also called Vanessa's sister and Austin to verify they still had their keys or had returned them, and both confirmed they did. Austin even drove over that afternoon to physically show me the key, which I'd completely forgotten I'd gotten back from him, and had hung on our key rack. The landlord was harder to reach, but when I finally got him on the phone, he admitted he'd had 6 copies of the house key at one point, and couldn't account for where all of them were now. That was infuriating, but also oddly relieving. At least we had a likely explanation. We never found out who that guy was. The police never caught him, and honestly, I don't think they tried that hard. No one was hurt, nothing irreplaceable was taken since he dropped the backpack when he ran, and they had bigger cases to worry about. Vanessa and I ended up breaking our lease 3 months later and moving to an apartment complex with actual security, cameras in the hallways, the whole deal. We both agreed we couldn't stay in that house, not after knowing someone had sat in our guest room in the dark, eating candy and listening to us live our lives just on the other side of a door. The thing that still bothers me, even now, isn't the theft or even the danger we were potentially in. It's that image of the chair pulled up facing the door, all those wrappers around it, and the realization that he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't panicked. He was just waiting, and if we'd come home even 30 minutes earlier, or if he'd decided to walk out of that room instead of hiding, I don't know what would have happened. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just a random guy who'd gotten hold of an old key, or if it was the previous tenant who'd never really left us alone. Either way, I check every lock twice now, every single night, and I probably always will. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday. I'm talking full-on obsessed, planning costumes in August, mapping out the best candy routes, the whole deal. I was 14 in October 2015, living with my mom and younger brother in a suburb outside Portland, Oregon. Our street, Oakmont Drive, was one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where people actually knew each other's names and borrowed lawn equipment. Every house went all out for Halloween. Carved pumpkins, fake cobwebs, those inflatable ghosts that looked ridiculous in daylight. Except for one house. Number 447, about 5 doors down from us. A single-story ranch with faded blue siding, belonging to a guy everyone just called Mr. Henley. He'd lived there longer than anyone could remember, kept to himself, never caused problems. But here's the weird part. Every single Halloween, without fail, he'd decorate his front porch. Not elaborate stuff, just a couple of carved pumpkins, some orange lights, a wreath on the door. Made it look like he was participating. But if you actually walked up those steps and knocked, nothing. Complete silence. The lights would be on inside, you could see the flicker of a TV through the curtains, but he never, ever answered the door. Most kids learned to skip his house after the first year of trying. It became this unspoken thing in the neighborhood. You'd see groups of trick-or-treaters walk right past 447 without even slowing down. But it always bugged me, you know? Why decorate if you're not going to hand out candy? Why make your house look inviting and then ignore everyone? My friend Troy, this scrawny kid with red hair who lived for causing trouble, had this theory that Mr. Henley was doing it on purpose, like some psychological experiment to mess with people. Troy's older brother Dylan was 17, had his license, and thought he was hot shit because he could grow a patchy beard. That October, Dylan decided he was going to teach the old creep a lesson for being antisocial. He recruited Troy, me, and this girl Amber from our grade who had a reputation for being fearless. The plan was simple, stupid teenager stuff. We'd go to Mr. Henley's house on Halloween night, TP his trees, maybe smash a pumpkin, ring the doorbell a bunch of times and run. Classic prank, nothing crazy. I remember feeling uneasy about it even then, but I didn't want to look like a coward in front of everyone, especially Amber. So I agreed. Halloween night came with that perfect autumn chill in the air. Our neighborhood was packed. Families everywhere, little kids in princess costumes holding their parents' hands, teenagers in lazy last-minute outfits. Dylan picked us up around 8:30 in his beat-up Jeep Cherokee, after most of the young trick-or-treaters had gone home. Troy was practically vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat, kept going on about how this was going to be legendary. Amber sat in the back with me, checking her phone, looking bored but game for whatever. We parked 2 streets over and walked, carrying rolls of toilet paper stuffed in our jacket pockets. The closer we got to Oakmont Drive, the quieter it became. Most porch lights were turning off, the Halloween energy dying down for the night. When we reached Mr. Henley's house, I noticed the decorations looked exactly the same as every other year. 2 jack-o'-lanterns on the porch steps, their triangle eyes glowing from the candles inside, orange string lights outlining the doorframe. His living room light was on, and through the sheer curtains, I could see the blue glow of his television. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. That's what made what Dylan said next feel so out of place. "Check it out," Dylan whispered, pointing to the roof edge above the porch. At first, I didn't see what he meant. Then Amber spotted it too. A small black object mounted under the eave, angled down toward the walkway. "Is that a camera?" she asked. We all stared at it for a second. It was definitely a camera, one of those compact security ones, and it was pointed directly at the sidewalk and front path. "Paranoid old bastard," Dylan muttered, but he was grinning like it made the whole thing more exciting. Troy suggested we do the prank from the side yard instead, away from the camera's view. We crept around to the right side of the house, where a tall wooden fence separated Mr. Henley's property from his neighbors. The area was darker here, just a small side window with the blinds drawn and a motion sensor light that thankfully didn't trigger. Dylan started unrolling toilet paper, getting ready to toss it over the fence into the front yard trees. That's when Troy noticed something that made him grab my arm hard enough to hurt. "Dude," he hissed, "there's another one." He was pointing at the corner of the house near the foundation. Another camera, smaller than the first, tucked into the shadow where the siding met the concrete. This one was aimed along the side of the house, covering the exact area where we were standing. My stomach twisted. Why would someone need cameras on the side of their house? Dylan tried to play it cool, said lots of people have security systems, but his voice had lost that cocky edge. Amber wanted to leave. She kept saying this was creepy and we should just go, but Troy, stubborn as always, said we'd come this far and weren't going to chicken out over some cameras. He started moving toward the back of the house, staying close to the wall, and like idiots, we followed. The backyard was small and enclosed by that same wooden fence, with a concrete patio and a rusted barbecue grill that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A sliding glass door led into what I assumed was the kitchen, and next to it was a regular door with a small window at the top. Everything was dark back there except for one thing. Mounted on the back corner of the house, pointed at the yard, was a third camera, and this one had a little red light blinking on it. Troy saw it the same time I did. Nobody said anything for a moment. We just stood there in this guy's backyard, realizing that every single angle of his property was being recorded. That's when Dylan, trying to salvage his tough guy image, did the dumbest thing possible. He walked right up to the back door and knocked. Loud. The sound echoed in the quiet night. We all tensed up, waiting for Mr. Henley to flip on the porch light or yell at us to get lost. But nothing happened. Dylan knocked again, harder this time, the kind of aggressive banging that would wake up anyone inside. Still nothing. "He's definitely home," Amber whispered, pointing at the TV light still visible through the front windows. We could even hear it faintly, the muffled sound of voices from whatever show was playing. Dylan tried the door handle, locked, obviously. Then he cupped his hands around his face and peered through the small window at the top of the door. He went completely still. "What?" Troy asked. "What do you see?" Dylan didn't answer right away. When he finally stepped back, his face looked pale even in the darkness. "There's papers," he said quietly. "Like, everywhere, covering the walls." Before anyone could process that, Troy shoved past him and looked through the window himself. "Holy shit," he breathed. "It's all printouts. Photos, I think." I didn't want to look. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, to go home, forget this whole stupid night. But curiosity is a terrible thing. I stepped up and pressed my face to the cold glass. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the glow spilling in from another room, but I could see enough. The walls were absolutely plastered with printed photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, overlapping each other like scales on a fish. They covered every visible surface, taped up in this obsessive collage that made my brain hurt to look at. From what I could make out, they were pictures of the street. Our street, different times of day, different seasons. I recognized Mrs. Palmer's garden from last spring, the Johnsons' car that they'd sold months ago, and people. Kids walking to the bus stop, parents pushing strollers, teenagers on bikes, all taken from a distance like surveillance photos. My eyes landed on one image that was closer than the others, clearer. It showed 3 kids in Halloween costumes from what looked like last year, a vampire, a witch, and a skeleton. They were walking right past Mr. Henley's house, probably on their way to better candy spots. The photo was zoomed in enough that you could see their faces clearly. I recognized the vampire. It was Troy's little sister, Kayla. She'd been 9 last Halloween. "We need to call the cops," Amber said, and her voice was shaking now. She had her phone out already. But before she could dial, we heard it. A sound from inside the house. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged across the floor. Heavy and slow. We all backed away from the door at the same time. Troy grabbed Dylan's arm and started pulling him toward the side of the house, toward the way we'd come in. That's when I noticed Dylan was staring at something. "Where's Troy?" he said. It took a second for the words to make sense. I turned around. Troy was right there next to Dylan. He'd just been pulling on his arm. But Dylan wasn't looking at Troy. He was looking past us, at the back fence. "Not Troy," Dylan said, his voice weird and flat. "The other kid, the one who was just standing by the grill." Ice flooded my veins. There had been 4 of us, me, Dylan, Troy, and Amber. Nobody else. "What are you talking about?" Amber demanded. But she was looking around now too, her phone's flashlight swinging wildly. Dylan insisted he'd seen someone, a shorter figure in dark clothes, standing by the barbecue grill when we were all looking through the window. He'd assumed it was one of us who'd wandered off. We tore out of that backyard like our lives depended on it. I slammed my shin against the corner of the fence gate so hard I saw stars, but I didn't stop running. We didn't stop until we reached Dylan's Jeep 2 streets away, all of us gasping for air, checking and rechecking that it was just the 4 of us. Dylan kept insisting he'd seen someone, describing a person maybe 5 feet tall, wearing a dark hoodie. Troy called him paranoid, said it was just shadows and he'd freaked himself out. But I'd seen Dylan's face in that moment. He wasn't the type to scare easy, and he'd looked genuinely confused, like his brain couldn't make sense of what his eyes had seen. We sat in the Jeep for almost 20 minutes arguing about what to do. Amber wanted to call the police immediately and tell them about the cameras and the photos. Troy was worried we'd get in trouble for trespassing. Dylan had gone quiet, just gripping the steering wheel and staring out the windshield. Finally, I convinced them we should at least tell our parents. Let them handle it like adults. We agreed to go home, and tomorrow we'd figure out the right way to report what we'd seen. Dylan dropped everyone off. When I got home, my mom was watching TV in the living room. I almost told her everything right then, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain that you were trying to vandalize someone's house and discovered something way worse? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos layered on top of each other, all those unsuspecting people going about their lives while being documented. The next morning, a Wednesday, my mom woke me up early. Her face was serious in a way that made my chest tighten. "Did you see Troy last night?" she asked. I told her, yeah, we'd all hung out for Halloween. She sat down on my bed and took a breath. "His mom just called. He never came home last night." The room started spinning. I told her that couldn't be right. Dylan had dropped Troy off at his house around 10:30, same as the rest of us. My mom said Troy's mom had been up waiting, and he never walked through the door. His phone was going straight to voicemail. They'd already called the police. I got dressed in a blur, and my mom drove me to Troy's house, where there were already 2 police cars parked outside. Troy's parents looked destroyed, his mom crying on the porch while his dad talked to the officers. They asked me questions. When did I last see him? Did he mention going anywhere else? Did he seem upset or different? I told them everything I could without mentioning where we'd actually been. Said we were just walking around the neighborhood. One of the officers wrote everything down in a little notepad, his face professionally neutral, asking if Troy had any problems at home or school, the standard runaway questions. By that afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Amber and told her we needed to tell someone about Mr. Henley's house, about what we'd seen. She'd been thinking the same thing. We decided to tell her older sister, who was 22 and worked as a paralegal, someone who'd know how to handle it properly. When we explained everything to her, showing her exactly where the house was on Oakmont Drive, her expression turned grim. She didn't yell at us for trespassing. She just made us repeat every detail twice, then immediately called a detective hotline she had saved in her phone from her work. Within an hour, there were 6 police cars on our street. I watched from my bedroom window as officers surrounded Mr. Henley's house, knocking on the door with that official police knock. When he didn't answer, they went around back. I couldn't see what happened next, but within 30 minutes, they were bringing Mr. Henley out in handcuffs. He was smaller than I'd imagined, balding, wearing a cardigan that made him look like somebody's retired grandfather. He wasn't fighting or yelling. He just looked resigned, like he'd been expecting this day to come eventually. More police showed up. They started carrying boxes out of the house. Computer equipment, hard drives, file folders. The whole street came out to watch. Nobody could believe it. Mr. Henley, the quiet neighbor who kept to himself, was being arrested right in front of everyone. The full story came out over the next few days, pieced together from news reports and neighborhood gossip. Police found over 30 cameras hidden around Mr. Henley's property and inside his house, all pointed at the street and sidewalks. His computer contained thousands upon thousands of photos and videos of children from the neighborhood, organized into folders by name, age, and physical description. He'd been doing this for at least 8 years, maybe longer. The cameras had motion sensors. They'd activate whenever someone walked by. He had footage of kids waiting for the school bus, playing in yards, riding bikes. Nothing explicitly illegal in terms of the footage itself, since it was all taken from his property of public spaces. But the scope and obsessive nature of the collection was enough for charges related to stalking and endangering minors. They found detailed notes about routines, favorite colors, names of friends. It was a surveillance operation that would have made intelligence agencies jealous. But here's the thing that still haunts me. They found Troy. Not at Mr. Henley's house, and that's what made it so much worse in a way. Troy had apparently panicked after Dylan dropped him off, couldn't stop thinking about those photos and that figure Dylan claimed to see. Instead of going inside his house, he'd walked back to Oakmont Drive by himself, planning to watch Mr. Henley's house from a distance to see if anything suspicious happened. A neighbor 2 doors down from Mr. Henley had a security camera, and it caught Troy standing across the street around 11 p.m. just watching the house. What the camera also caught, about 15 minutes later, was a van pulling up. Not Mr. Henley's vehicle, something else entirely. A white contractor van with no plates visible. 2 men got out. They walked straight toward Troy. The footage was grainy and taken from an angle, but you could see Troy backing away, then the men moving faster, and then Troy was just gone. The van drove off. Police traced the van through other neighborhood cameras and traffic footage. It led them to a house in Vancouver, Washington, about 20 miles away. What they found there was worse than anything at Mr. Henley's place. Turns out Mr. Henley wasn't working alone. He was part of a network, and his role was surveillance, identifying targets, documenting patterns, providing information to others who did the actual abductions. The house in Vancouver was where they brought the kids. I can't write the details of what happened in that place. I still have nightmares about what the news reports implied. They found Troy there, along with 2 other children who'd been missing from different counties. Troy had been there less than 24 hours when police raided the location. He was physically okay, traumatized beyond belief, but alive. The timing of our discovery and report had literally saved his life. If we'd waited even one more day to tell someone, the outcome would have been different. 7 people were arrested in total, including Mr. Henley. The trial was massive, made national news for a while. Mr. Henley took a plea deal and got 40 years. The others got more. Troy moved away with his family about 6 months later. Couldn't handle living on that street anymore, knowing that his every movement had been cataloged for years by someone living 5 houses down. I don't blame him. I moved away too for college and never went back except to visit my mom. She sold that house in 2023. Sometimes I think about how many times I walked past Mr. Henley's place as a kid, completely oblivious. How many times I was photographed, filed away, studied. The police said we were lucky that Mr. Henley's role was just observation, that he personally never hurt anyone, just enabled others to do so. But that doesn't make it better. He sat in that house for years, watching children, knowing exactly what his information would be used for. The decorations on Halloween were bait, a test to see which kids would come to his door, get close enough for clear facial shots. That's why he never answered. He didn't want candy-seeking trick-or-treaters. He wanted footage. The figure Dylan saw in the backyard that night? Police think it might have been one of Mr. Henley's associates, checking on something, maybe even watching us while we discovered the cameras. We'll never know for sure, and honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is that Halloween will never feel the same. Every decorated house, every porch light, every neighbor I don't quite recognize, it all carries this weight now. Trust is a fragile thing. Sometimes the monsters don't hide in the shadows. Sometimes they live 5 doors down and wave politely when you check the mail. November 1st, 2023 started like any other morning after Halloween, except I couldn't stop thinking about what happened the night before. I'm 17, a senior at Lincoln High in Pennsylvania, and I'd been looking forward to having the house to myself for once. Mom and Dad had this wedding to go to in Philadelphia, some second cousin I'd never met, and they'd be gone until late. They kept asking if I wanted them to stay, if I'd be okay alone on Halloween night. But honestly, I was thrilled. No parents meant I could game with my buddies online, order whatever food I wanted, and not deal with handing out candy to screaming kids all night. I'd been working part-time at Best Buy after school, saving up for a car, and I was exhausted. A quiet night in sounded perfect. Our neighborhood in Harrisburg wasn't exactly the trick-or-treating capital anyway. Most families drove their kids to the newer developments where the houses were closer together. We lived on Belmont Road, where the properties had these long driveways and the houses sat far back from the street. Perfect for privacy, perfect for what I thought would be a peaceful evening. Around 7:30, just as it was getting dark, the first knock came. I was in the middle of a raid in Destiny 2, headset on, completely zoned into the game. The knock was loud enough that I heard it through my headphones, which annoyed me because I was about to take down a boss. I muted my mic and yelled, "We're not doing candy this year," toward the front door, not even bothering to get up. My character died because I wasn't paying attention, and I cursed under my breath. The knocking came again, harder this time, more insistent. I pulled off my headset and actually listened. It was this weird rhythm, 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 slow ones. Not the usual excited kid knock. Something about it felt deliberate, almost like a code. I pushed back from my desk in the living room where I'd set up my gaming station and walked to the front hallway. Our house has this long entrance with the door at the end, and there's a small window beside it. But the porch light was off because, well, we weren't participating. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see shapes, 2, maybe 3 people standing there. They were wearing masks, looked like adults based on their height. I figured maybe older kids, high schoolers trying to score free candy. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out through it, "Sorry, we're not handing out candy tonight." My voice came out stronger than I felt, trying to sound authoritative like my dad does when he wants solicitors to leave. There was this long pause, maybe 10 seconds of complete silence, and I thought they'd left. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, muffled through the door, sweet and friendly. "Oh, we're not trick-or-treating, honey. We're from the house across the street, the Buchanans. We're collecting donations for the community center's Halloween fund. Just a few dollars if you can spare it." I didn't know anyone named Buchanan, and I'd lived here my whole life. The house directly across from ours had been empty for 3 months since old Mr. Garrett died. His kids were still fighting over the estate or something. My mom had mentioned it. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, feeling this weird tension in my chest. The smart thing would have been to just say no thanks and walk away. But I felt rude, you know? Like maybe they were new neighbors I hadn't met yet, and I didn't want to be that jerk teenager who slammed the door on people trying to do something nice for the community. I don't really have any cash on me," I said through the door, which was true. I had maybe $6 in my wallet upstairs. "Maybe you could come back when my parents are home?" The woman's voice came again, and this time something about it sounded different, less friendly, more practiced, like she was reading from a script. "That's okay, sweetie. Do you have Venmo? We can do it digitally. Or we're also just passing out these flyers about the event. Could you just open the door real quick so I can hand you one?" Every instinct I had suddenly screamed no. My girlfriend Veronica, we'd been dating for 8 months. She was always joking about how I was too trusting, how I'd probably let a serial killer in if they asked politely enough. I remembered her saying that, and actually took a step back from the door. "You know what? I'm actually not supposed to open the door when my parents aren't home," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "But thanks anyway." The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable. I could see the shapes through the frosted glass, and they weren't moving, just standing there. Then came that same knock pattern again, 3 quick, 2 slow, but harder this time, almost aggressive. The whole door shook with it. My heart started pounding in a way that made my ears ring. I backed up further into the hallway, putting more distance between me and that door. "I really can't help you tonight," I shouted, my voice cracking a bit on the last word. I hated how scared I sounded. Through the window, I watched the shapes finally move. They turned away from the door, and I could see them walking down our porch steps. Relief flooded through me so fast I actually felt dizzy. See? Just persistent fundraisers or whatever. Annoying but harmless. I laughed at myself a little, feeling stupid for getting so worked up. I went back to my gaming setup, put my headset back on, and rejoined my buddies in the chat. "Dude, where'd you go?" my friend Carlos asked. "Had some weirdos at the door," I said, trying to sound casual about it. "Halloween brings out all the crazies." We played for another hour, and I'd mostly forgotten about the whole thing. Around 9 o'clock, I ordered a pizza, pepperoni and jalapeno, something Mom would never let me get because she says it's too greasy. I was paying online when I heard it again. That knock. 3 quick, 2 slow. I ripped off my headset so fast it clattered onto my desk. The knocking continued, patient and rhythmic, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. This time I was angry more than scared. What part of no did these people not understand? I marched to the front door, ready to be way less polite, and looked through the peephole we had installed up high. 3 people stood on my porch, all wearing those cheap rubber masks you get at Spirit Halloween, a werewolf, a zombie, and what looked like a screaming ghost face. They were all facing the door, perfectly still, like they were posing for a photo. All 3 were definitely adults, broad shoulders, tall, wearing dark clothes that weren't costumes. Something about the way they stood there, not fidgeting or talking to each other, made my anger evaporate instantly. Normal people don't stand that still. "We're still collecting for the community center," the woman's voice came again, but this time she wasn't even trying to sound friendly. It was flat, almost bored. "We know you're alone in there. Your parents won't be back until late." My entire body went rigid. How did they know that? How did they know my parents were gone? I definitely hadn't told them that detail. I stepped away from the door as quietly as possible, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. My phone was still on my desk in the living room. I needed to call 911 or my parents or someone. But as I turned to head back, I heard something that made me stop breathing. Footsteps, not on the porch. These were moving around the side of the house. Deliberate, crunching through the leaves my dad had been too lazy to rake last weekend. They were circling the house. I crept toward the living room window that faced our driveway and carefully pulled back just the edge of the curtain. The werewolf mask was peering into my dad's office window on the side of the house, hands cupped around the face to see inside better. The person was trying the window, jiggling it gently to test if it was locked. My dad was paranoid about that stuff. But watching someone actually try to break into your house while you're inside is a completely different level of terror than anything I'd ever experienced. My legs felt weak, like they might just give out. I let the curtain fall back and basically crawled to my desk, grabbed my phone with shaking fingers, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and hearing another human voice almost made me cry with relief. "There are people trying to break into my house," I whispered, crouching down behind my desk like that would somehow protect me. "I'm home alone, and they keep knocking, and now they're checking the windows." The dispatcher asked for my address, and I gave it, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are they armed? Can you see weapons?" she asked. I hadn't even thought to check for weapons. The idea made my throat close up. "I don't know. They're wearing masks, Halloween masks. There's 3 of them, maybe more." She told me to stay on the line, that officers were being dispatched and were about 8 minutes away. 8 minutes. That felt like an eternity. She kept talking to me, asking questions. Was I in a room with a lock? Did I know these people? Had they said anything threatening? I answered automatically, my brain only half processing what I was saying. The knocking had stopped. That somehow felt worse than when they were pounding on the door. At least then I knew where they were. Now the house was completely silent except for my ragged breathing and the tinny sound of the dispatcher's voice. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, metal on metal, coming from the back of the house, the kitchen door. We had this old sliding glass door that led to our deck, and the lock on it had always been kind of loose. "They're trying to get in through the back," I hissed into the phone, scrambling to my feet. The dispatcher's voice got more urgent. "Is there a room you can lock yourself in? Preferably with only one entry point?" My parents' bedroom had a lock on the door, and it was upstairs, away from both entry points. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might actually burst. Behind me, I heard glass breaking, not shattering, but that distinct crack of glass giving way, followed by the screech of the sliding door being forced open on its track. They were inside. They were actually inside my house. I got to my parents' room, slammed the door shut, and turned the lock. It was one of those flimsy privacy locks, not a deadbolt, the kind a decent kick could probably break through. I pushed their heavy dresser in front of the door, adrenaline making me strong enough to move it by myself, even though it usually took both my parents. The dispatcher was still talking, telling me the police were 6 minutes out, telling me to stay quiet, to stay hidden. I could hear voices downstairs now, casual conversation like they were guests at a party, male voices discussing something I couldn't make out. What happened next still makes me sick to think about. I heard footsteps moving through our house, not rushing, not searching frantically, but methodical. Drawers opening and closing in my dad's office. The sound of our TV being unplugged, I recognized that specific pop the speakers made. They were robbing us. Just casually looting our home while I hid upstairs like a scared kid. I heard one of them laugh at something, this normal, everyday laugh that made the whole thing feel surreal. How could someone break into a house, knowing someone was home, and just laugh about it? Then the footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate steps on our creaky staircase. I pressed myself against the far wall of my parents' room, clutching my phone so tight my knuckles ached. The dispatcher was whispering now, as if they could somehow hear her through my phone. Police are 3 minutes away. Stay absolutely quiet. Don't engage with them. One of them tried the handle of the guest bathroom. Then my bedroom door. I heard it swing open, heard someone walking around in there. My gaming setup that I'd spent months saving for. My laptop. My collection of vintage band posters that Veronica had gotten me for my birthday. They were trashing my space, going through my stuff. Finally, footsteps stopped right outside my parents' door. The handle jiggled, once, twice. Then a man's voice, calm and almost friendly. "Hey kid, we know you called the cops. They're not gonna get here in time. Just stay in there and keep quiet and nobody gets hurt. We're just here for the valuables." I couldn't even respond. My throat had completely closed up. I just stood there, pressed against the wall, praying that dresser would hold if they decided to force the door. But they didn't. After a few seconds of silence, I heard them move away, back down the stairs. More sounds of things being moved, collected. A crash that sounded like our china cabinet in the dining room. Mom's grandmother's dishes that she only brought out for Thanksgiving. I wanted to scream at them, tell them to leave that alone, but I bit down on my own hand to stay silent. The dispatcher kept whispering encouragement, telling me I was doing great. That help was almost there. Then, like someone had flipped a switch, I heard rapid movement downstairs. Footsteps running toward the back of the house, car doors slamming outside, an engine starting. They were leaving. Through my parents' window, I saw a dark van, one of those old cargo vans with no windows in the back, peeling out of our driveway so fast the tires squealed. Maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the most beautiful sound of my life. Sirens. Multiple sirens getting closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, painting the walls of the bedroom in alternating colors. The police found me still barricaded in my parents' room, still on the phone with dispatch, shaking so badly I could barely push the dresser away from the door to let them in. There were 4 officers, and they cleared the whole house before they'd let me come out. The place was destroyed. They'd taken our TV, my dad's expensive camera equipment, Mom's jewelry box from their bedroom, my gaming laptop, even the spare car keys we kept in the kitchen drawer. The sliding glass door was completely shattered, glass everywhere across the kitchen floor. But what really got me was the front door. It was standing wide open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. They'd unlocked it from the inside and left it open, like they were making a point. Like they wanted me to know how easy it had been. One of the officers, this older guy with gray in his beard named Officer Paulson, sat with me on the couch while they processed the scene. He explained that there'd been a string of burglaries in surrounding neighborhoods over the past 2 months. All on Halloween night. Groups of 2 to 4 adults, dressed like trick-or-treaters or fundraisers, would knock on doors to see if anyone was home. If someone answered, they'd make an excuse and leave. If no one answered, or if they could tell it was just a kid home alone, they'd force entry. They'd hit 6 houses that night alone before getting to ours. I was the first person who'd actually called the cops while they were still inside. My parents got home around 11. While the police were still there taking statements and dusting for fingerprints. Mom completely broke down when she saw the house, and Dad just kept hugging me saying, "You did everything right, you did everything right," over and over. The weird thing is, they caught the group 2 weeks later. Turned out they were operating out of a rental property in Mechanicsburg, about 20 minutes away. 4 people total, 3 men and 1 woman, all in their 30s and 40s, all with prior records. They'd been doing this for years, apparently, moving from state to state and hitting suburbs during holidays when people were distracted and homes were empty. The cops recovered some of our stuff from a storage unit they'd rented, though my laptop was already sold. The thing that still messes with me isn't even the robbery itself, it's how normal they sounded. That casual laugh, the friendly voice at the door, the guy calmly telling me to stay quiet. They'd done this so many times it was just routine for them, like they were working a regular job. Sometimes I still hear that knock pattern in my head. 3 quick, 2 slow, and my whole body tenses up. We moved to a different house 6 months later. Mom and Dad said it was because they wanted to downsize, but I know the real reason. None of us could feel safe there anymore. I still can't stay home alone at night, even now. Veronica thinks I should talk to someone about it, and she's probably right. But honestly, posting this here helps. Just getting it out there, you know. If you're ever home alone and something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Don't worry about being rude or paranoid. Just lock the doors, call the cops, and don't open that door for anyone. People always talk about Halloween like it's harmless. Costumes, candy, and too much sugar before bedtime. That night started exactly like that for me and my best friend Lucas. We were both 13, still trying to pretend we weren't too old to go door to door. Our neighborhood in Cedar Hills was calm, all trimmed lawns and pumpkin lights. My mom had given us one rule before we left. Only wrapped candy, okay? Of course, we nodded and ignored it the second we were out of sight. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when we noticed a porch that looked different. No plastic skeletons, no lights. Just a single orange candle flickering on a wooden table by the door. An old woman stepped out as we got close. She had snow-white hair tied in a bun and wore a knitted shawl with tiny black cats embroidered along the edges. "Evening, boys," she said with this soft, tired voice. "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." She smiled and handed us small foil-wrapped brownies, still warm. "Homemade," she added proudly. Lucas grinned and said thank you before I could even think twice. We didn't open them right away. The foil was a little greasy, and they smelled like cinnamon and cocoa. It felt almost too personal, like something your grandma would give you, not a stranger. Lucas said his aunt used to bake brownies like that, and he tore his open, took a bite, and laughed. "See? Perfectly fine." I remember hesitating, the warmth seeping through the foil into my palm. I told myself it would be rude not to at least try. So I ate half of mine while we kept walking toward the next house. About 2 hours later, I started feeling heavy, like every step was through mud. Lucas joked that maybe we'd just eaten too much candy, but his words slurred a little. I remember standing in front of a house with inflatable ghosts when the world tilted sideways. The lights stretched, the sounds of kids laughing faded, and I couldn't tell if I was still standing or on the ground. I heard Lucas mumbling something, but it sounded far away, like underwater. After that, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on my bedroom floor. My mom was hovering over me, panicked, holding the phone to her ear. My mouth was dry and I could barely keep my eyes open. She said she'd found me collapsed near the front door when she got back from her shift. I tried to ask about Lucas, but my voice barely came out. She didn't even realize I'd gone out trick-or-treating alone. She thought he was home by then. That's when I saw the crumpled piece of foil on the floor beside me, and it hit me like a puzzle snapping together. The next morning, my mom told me Lucas had been taken to the hospital. His parents found him unconscious too in his driveway. The doctors said we were lucky. Whatever we'd eaten had been dosed with a strong sedative. Police came to ask questions, and I remember sitting on the couch trying to recall every detail about that woman's house. The candle, the shawl with the cats, the way she'd said, "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." I told them everything I could think of, but the more I talked, the more it felt like the edges of that memory were smudged. 2 officers drove around the block with my mom and me that afternoon. Every house looked normal. Plastic pumpkins, fake cobwebs, all the usual stuff. But when we got to the spot where I swore the old lady's house had been, there was nothing. Just an empty lot with overgrown weeds and a "for sale" sign half buried in dirt. The officer asked if I was sure, and I pointed to where the candle had been, the porch steps, everything. He just looked at me like he didn't want to say what he was thinking. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head throbbed, and I kept replaying the moment she handed us the brownies. I could still smell them, warm chocolate and cinnamon. I could even hear the faint clink of her bracelets as she moved. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate, crunching through leaves. I told myself it was a raccoon, but the steps stopped right beneath my window, and a shadow passed across the curtain. Tall but hunched. I waited, holding my breath, until it moved away toward the street. The following morning, police cars were parked down the street again. They'd found something behind the empty lot, a cellar entrance hidden beneath rotted boards. Inside, there were shelves stacked with baking ingredients, dozens of foil-wrapped brownies, and children's costumes. One of the detectives told my mom quietly that there were also blankets, a lantern, and a small radio tuned to static. No one lived there, not anymore. The house had burned down years earlier after a gas leak. That lot had been empty ever since. When they showed me photos from the cellar, one detail hit me hard. On one of the shelves was a folded shawl with embroidered black cats, exactly like the one the woman wore. The detective said they were still testing fingerprints, but his expression told me they didn't expect to find anything living down there. Lucas and I were told we'd probably ingested just enough to knock us out, not enough to kill us. Whoever or whatever that woman was, she'd planned for a much longer night. A week later, the neighborhood was back to normal. Decorations came down, kids were back in school, and adults talked about it like some urban legend that had gotten out of hand. But I couldn't walk past that lot without feeling a chill. The candle table was gone, but the grass where it once stood never grew back. It stayed like a dark patch in the dirt, perfectly round, as if scorched. Every time I saw it, I swore I could smell that same mix of chocolate and cinnamon lingering in the air. It's been years now, and Halloween still makes me uneasy. I don't touch anything homemade, not even from people I trust. Sometimes, when the porch lights start flickering at night, I remember her voice, soft, almost motherly, telling us we were her first trick-or-treaters. My mom says trauma can play tricks on memory, that maybe I misremembered parts of that night. But I know what I saw. I know what I tasted. And I know that somewhere out there, someone else might still be handing out those same warm, foil-wrapped brownies.